Have you ever wondered why some women live alone? No boyfriend, no partner, not even seeming like they're looking for one. The answer isn't loneliness, lack of options, or heartbreak. It lies in something more uncomfortable, more unsettling, something that deconstructs everything we were taught about a woman's role. Because when a woman chooses to be alone, she isn't getting lost. She's finding herself. And that kind of self-discovery doesn't come with applause, likes, or company. It doesn't come with a checklist of achievements or a neat little box that others can easily categorize. It comes with silence, strength, and a kind of freedom most people still don't understand. The silence is not an absence. It's a teacher. The strength is not arrogance. It's survival reshaped into something elegant. And the freedom it isn't a rebellion against men or love it's the kind of liberation that comes when you finally realize you don't need permission to exist fully. No, she's not lonely. She's selective. She's not cold. She just got tired of burning for people who never wanted to feel the warmth. She learned that to constantly give without reciprocity is not love, it's slow erosion. And she decided not to erode anymore. There's something profoundly threatening about a woman who doesn't need a relationship to feel whole, because that shatters the logic of control, dismantles the myth of emotional dependency, and reveals a brutal truth. If she doesn't need saving, then she can't be controlled. If she doesn't require validation, she can't be manipulated. And that, in a world built on power imbalances, is terrifying. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't need saving. And most women are still learning to recognize themselves in that silent yet deafening mirror of power. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow. And many of these single women are actually a reflection of the collective shadow. They are what many dream of becoming, but few have the courage to embody. They don't scream for love. They whisper their choices. They don't put themselves on display to attract attention. They retreat to preserve themselves. They're less interested in charming princes and more in their own peace. And that makes people uncomfortable, because while the world demands urgency to be with someone, these women have discovered the power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend isn't lost. She's operating on a different level, a level where nothing is begged for. It's chosen. Where approval isn't needed, presence is enough. And maybe that's why she sparks so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to label or explain her. Because society has always feared what it cannot categorize. But what many still don't understand is that behind her apparent absence is a presence that fills, that transcends, that challenges the emotional status quo. She doesn't want just any kind of love. She wants something that doesn't shrink her. And until that comes along, she stands strong, whole, complete. This isn't pride, it's discernment. It's saying no to everything that asks her to bend, to fold, to silence herself. Maybe you don't get it right now. Maybe you think it's exaggeration, pride, or emotional damage in disguise. But deep down, way deep down, there's a question inside you, a quiet one that pulses even when you try to ignore it. What if that silent path is actually the only one that leads to the most important kind of love, the one that starts with you? The silence that surrounds a woman who lives alone is not emptiness, it's a sanctuary. It's the space where she builds, writes, heals, dreams. And those who don't understand the value of that space often call her cold, distant, or even arrogant. But what few people see is that she didn't build that fortress to shut the world out. She built it to not lose herself. Carl Jung also said that everything we don't face in ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. And maybe that's why so many women still confuse solitude with absence, when in reality, it can be the fertile ground for self-discovery. While most people look to fill themselves through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward. And there, in the vastness of her own unconscious, she faced the ghosts she avoided for years. Childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments disguised as love. She didn't run from them anymore. She stood still long enough to let them surface, to see them, to heal them. Her decision to be alone didn't come from an open wound, but from a scar that finally healed. She didn't stop believing in love. She just stopped accepting what others called love, when it only made her feel smaller. This woman knows chaos. She's loved until she lost herself. She's given too much. She's begged for crumbs that never should have been offered in the first place. But at some point, she woke up. And that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a series of disappointments that stopped hurting and started teaching. What you see now isn't coldness. It's emotional maturity. And maturity is scary because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't want just any company. She wants reciprocity. She's no longer attracted to promises, but to real presence. So maybe that's why she seems unreachable to many, because she doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be seen. And that takes more than charm or sweet words. It takes courage to dive into the depths where few dare to go. And that's where many give up. Not because she's difficult, but because she's whole. And when a woman becomes whole, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who are also seeking that wholeness. Fear from those who still live in halves, waiting for someone else to make them feel complete. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by fate's whim, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't hiding. She's protecting herself. There's a vast difference between isolating and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't easily accept a woman like this. A world that still preaches happily ever after only exists in pairs. A world that distrusts those without a partner, as if that were a sign of failure. But what if the failure is actually the opposite? What if the true tragedy is never learning to stand in your own company, never learning to meet yourself fully, never being able to say, I am enough, even here, even now. Not through shouting, but simply by existing. And so, the woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not rejecting love, she's redefining it. She's not closing doors, she's opening the only one that truly matters first, the door inward. And when that door is opened, when that silence becomes a sanctuary, when that strength becomes a steady flame, then, and only then, does she know she was never truly alone. Carl Jung once said that where convention rules, there's little room for authenticity. And this woman doesn't live by convention. She lives by essence. Convention tells her to hurry, to compromise, to fear time. Convention whispers that a woman's worth is measured by who chooses her, not by who she chooses to be. But she no longer listens. She learned that convention often means shrinking yourself to fit into boxes that were never designed with your soul in mind. And she refuses to shrink anymore. She hears phrases like, "You're too picky, you should be more open, nobody's perfect." And she smiles. A calm, steady, almost ironic smile, because she knows what many call picky is simply the bare minimum. The minimum it took her decades to realize she deserves. For too long she accepted crumbs, believing that was all she could ask for. Now she knows better. She isn't chasing perfection, nor does she demand a flawless human being. What she's seeking is someone mature enough to love without destroying. Someone who has walked through their own fire, as she has, and emerged not unscathed, but self-aware. Someone who has done the inner work, the shadow work, the painful peeling back of illusions that she herself has faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you find on just any street corner. That's not something dating apps or casual encounters can package. That kind of soul requires time, depth, and self-confrontation. Rare qualities in a culture obsessed with distraction. The discomfort she causes isn't in what she says, it's in what she represents. She's living proof that it's possible to be happy without depending on anyone else. And that truth tears masks off. Men who feed on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel judged. But she isn't here to confront anyone. She's just being. And the authenticity of someone who has freed herself is by itself a brutal mirror to those still living in chains. This woman isn't in a hurry. She doesn't need to rush things to please anyone. She respects her own pace. And for that, she stirs a silent fury in a society that wants everything now: fast love, fast validation, fast replacements for the emptiness within. But she refuses the conveyor belt of shallow connections. She wants depth, while the world chases distractions. She wants presence, while the world offers only shallow availability. She longs for soul-level bonds while everyone else is trying to look interesting on the next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not a game. It's truth. When she walks away, it's not drama. It's self-defense. When she chooses to stay home instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance. It's clarity. And that clarity earned through pain, loss, surrender, and rebirth is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't live to please. She lives to be. And that simple act of being is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what unsettles people most about this woman isn't her solitude. It's the peace she's found within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey that she took. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't a wellness hashtag. It was a grueling process of stripping off masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through the eyes of others. She sees herself through her own eyes. And that changes everything. How many times have you wondered if being alone is failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the need to justify yourself for not having someone by your side? This woman has felt that too. She once thought there was something wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. But one day she understood. It's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. It's better to sleep in silence than to lie next to someone who makes you feel lonelier than solitude ever could. And that day, she made a pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserves. Her path is not a straight line. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence. Sometimes she feels the ache of wanting to be held, the tenderness of missing a presence that isn't there. But there's also a strength that grows with each decision made in awareness, a quiet dignity in choosing not to settle. She has learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she wants is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports, without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to keep growing on her own. Not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more whole than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to share that awareness with. That's intimidating because it demands emotional responsibility. And sadly, few are willing to love responsibly. Most still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear. But she has no use for those half-loves anymore. If she walks alone today, it's because every step echoes with learning. Every no she gives is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And that certainty, born from the deepest part of her soul, transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same woman who once begged to be loved. Something inside her broke. And it was precisely that break that set her free. Because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new form. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she lived through. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas that weren't just hers but those of all the women who came before her. She carried wounds she didn't create. She bore silences she didn't choose. And then bravely, painfully, she broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She burned bridges, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. And from the ashes, something new was born. A woman who knows her worth, who holds her silence like a crown, who walks into each day not waiting to be chosen, but already choosing herself. She learned that it wasn't her job to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. That revelation came slowly, like the breaking of dawn after a long night. It didn't come from one heartbreak, but from a lifetime of little betrayals, moments where she said yes when her soul screamed no, times when she gave her tenderness to people who only knew how to take. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong. They told her she was demanding. They told her she would grow old alone. They told her she would regret it. But she stood her ground. First with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability. Because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. Once you face silence deep enough to echo, you stop fearing solitude. She learned to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She realized that being alone wasn't emptiness, it was power. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth. Not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She has seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth. A hollow smile, a rushed compliment, a connection offered out of loneliness rather than authenticity, she sees through it all. And she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Because walking away no longer feels like loss. It feels like preservation. Her transformation isn't superficial. It's archetypal. It's as if she has tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory stored in the bones of women everywhere, the truth that women weren't born to serve, but to express. Not to be shaped, but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something awakened in her, a wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her with labels cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks because she no longer lives to fit him. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough to not need anyone. That's the paradox that makes her so magnetic and so threatening. She doesn't need you, but she may choose you. And choice born from wholeness is infinitely stronger than any choice made out of lack. There's something sacred about the way she walks through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet. It isn't loud and it isn't fragile. It doesn't depend on anyone noticing. And it's in that silence that her true strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises. She no longer tries to convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life, because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be offered. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply declines. Not with drama, not with fury. She doesn't slam the door. She just steps away with the dignity of someone who has gotten lost too many times to let the same wound happen again. What few people understand is that this woman still longs for love. She still wants to be held, touched, chosen. But she wants it without losing herself, because she has spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. She will not shrink again. Now, she only offers herself where there's room to be whole. And that requires a level of maturity that goes far beyond romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. It requires the courage to love without possession, without games, without control. She's not looking for fairy tales. She's looking for a soul alliance, a connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it, because she would rather wait than survive on emotional crumbs. To many, that sounds like arrogance. But it isn't arrogance. It's self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman. A woman who has walked away from the superficial and dived into the depths. Who got tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected. Who chose to be alone not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her whole world begins to change. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts, like something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. People may not be able to name it, but they feel it. It isn't mysticism. It's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. And that's what makes her radiant. She is light and shadow, tenderness and strength, solitude and longing. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply refuses to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. She longs to share her soul, but only with someone who has met their own. Because she's not looking for someone to fix her, save her, or complete her. She's looking for someone to walk beside her, equal in their wholeness, willing to face life's depths with the same courage she has already shown. And until that comes, she continues her journey apologetically, unhurried, unwavering. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm. Because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is. Love that only adores your sweetness but recoils from your anger is not love. Love that applauds your strength but silences your vulnerability is not love. To her, love is not selective, it embraces the whole spectrum. And those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness, that necessary taste for growth, for truth, for balance. She's too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time, strong enough to keep choosing this path, even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood, because she knows that the deepest kind of alignment is not painless, it requires sacrifice. It requires saying no when every voice around you tells you to say yes. That is the journey of an awakened soul, giving up instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her. Women who don't need. Women who don't bow. Women who refuse to be molded. Why? Because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once dictated, a woman only has worth if she is with someone. When she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that for the Sistine is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground. Because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself. And after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. It won't be a cure. It will be a dance. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake, that she will regret it, that she will end up bitter, that she will miss her chance. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride. It's not rebellion. It's not a phase. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence. The same wisdom Jung called Individuation, the process of becoming fully who you are, without masks, without compromise, without shrinking to fit into others' stories. And when that happens, nothing outside her has more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout. It reveals itself in subtle gestures, in the way she quietly closes a door without resentment, in how she withdraws when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side, because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment, It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is. And that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, love made for display. But she's already seen behind the curtain. She knows the trick. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone. It's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes choice. Waiting becomes a path. What once hurt now teaches. What once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside, can't you? That stirring, that spark. Maybe it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew her, the woman you're becoming. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly. Something that no longer fits in old molds. Something that, if you let it, could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without hurry, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She is proof that solitude doesn't mean absence, it can mean presence in its purest form. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, undeniable. And along that journey, she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. Fires that whisper, you don't have to settle, you don't have to shrink, you don't have to trade yourself away for love that only knows how to consume. If something inside you was touched by this story, maybe it's because deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come yet, maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. The woman who refuses to beg for space in someone else's story, because she is already writing her own. And if this message found you at the right moment, if it awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then let it stay with you. Let it keep resonating. Let it shift something inside you. Because when a woman decides that being whole is more important than being chosen, the world changes. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Old structures shake. New archetypes rise. And love itself evolves. The love that comes after that is not possession. It is partnership. It is not about halves seeking to complete each other, but about two wholes overflowing together. It is not fragile, it is fierce. It is not shallow, it is soul deep. And until that love arrives, she remains loyal to herself. She remains awake. She remains free.